I was watching my favorite TV show, the one that kept me company every evening, when my son-in-law marched into the living room, grabbed the remote out of my hand, and shut the TV off with a loud click. "Enough of this trash," he said, as if I were a child who needed scolding. He didn't live in my house. He wasn't paying my bills. And he certainly wasn't invited to critique my choices. But he stood there with that smug look, as though he had done me some kind of favor. My daughter didn't say a word. She gave me an apologetic look, but followed him out of the room like a shadow. That silence hurt more than his arrogance. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply stood up, went to my room, and closed the door. If they thought I was weak, they would soon learn otherwise. The next morning, I woke up with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. I made breakfast only for myself, cleaned only my own things, and decided that if I was going to be treated like a burden, I would stop acting like part of the household. By evening, I had already called a lawyer. Within a week, I moved out. I didn't leave a note, only the house keys on the kitchen counter. Let them wonder, let them scramble. What neither of them seemed to remember was that the house was mine. Bought with my money, maintained by me, legally owned by me. I had let them live there out of generosity, something they had begun to treat like their right. 3 months later, I was sitting comfortably in my new apartment, peaceful, quiet, with a TV I could watch whenever and whatever I pleased, when my phone rang. My daughter's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," she said, voice trembling, "can we talk, please? We need your help." I kept my voice steady. "You need my help. Why?" Silence. Then she whispered the truth. They had been evicted. Bills piled up. His job fell through. Nothing was stable anymore. Their comfortable little life had cracked without the roof I had provided. Her voice broke. "We shouldn't have treated you like that. He was wrong. I was wrong. Please, can we come back to live with you?" I looked around at my tidy living room, my peaceful sanctuary. I remembered the click of the remote, the cold tone, the humiliation I wasn't supposed to feel. "Come back," I repeated softly. Why would I bring back people who thought my life, my comfort, my choices were trash? She began crying. "Please, Mom. We've learned our lesson. We'll respect you. We'll do anything." For a moment, I let the weight of it hang in the air. 3 months ago, they dismissed me like I didn't matter. Now they were begging. "You can visit?" I said finally. "But live with me." "No, not anymore. You both showed me what home meant to you, and what I meant in it. I won't forget that." She sobbed, apologizing over and over, but I ended the call gently. I turned my TV back on, the show picking up right where I left off. And this time, nobody was there to switch it over. It began with something so small, so ordinary, that anyone watching from the outside would have thought it was nothing, a small dispute, a moment of irritation in a family home. But for me, it was the spark that lit a fire I had been holding inside for far too long. I was sitting peacefully in the living room, wrapped in the soft light of the evening. The TV played my favorite show, the one I watched not just for entertainment, but for the sense of routine, comfort, and familiarity it brought into my life. That show had become my companion through years of loneliness, change, and quiet responsibilities. Every episode carried memories of nights when the house felt empty, when I felt unheard, and when the world outside seemed a little too harsh. So, watching it wasn't just a pastime. It was a small reminder that I still had pieces of myself that mattered. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps, uninvited, unnecessary. My son-in-law walked in with that same attitude he carried everywhere, as if the world needed to be rearranged according to his mood. Before I could even greet him, or even turn my head, he reached forward and snatched the remote from my hand. The suddenness of the gesture made me blink. He didn't look at me, didn't hesitate, didn't ask. Just pressed the power button and shut off the TV with one sharp, dismissive click. "Enough of this trash," he declared, the words slicing through the room with the kind of arrogance only a person who has never been challenged can possess. For a moment, I didn't understand what had happened. I stared at the blank screen, my fingers still curled around the space where the remote had been. A wave of heat rose in my chest, the kind that feels like anger but tastes more like humiliation. He wasn't just insulting a TV show. He was insulting me, my choices, my right to enjoy something in my own home. It wasn't his house. He didn't pay for the TV, the electricity, or even the couch he was standing next to. And yet, the entitlement in his voice made it sound like he had the authority to decide what I could or could not do. My daughter appeared behind him, her expression soft and apologetic but silent. Always silent. She didn't speak up for me, didn't tell him that he was crossing a line, didn't so much as give him a nudge to remind him that I was the owner of the home, not him. She just looked at me like she hoped the moment would pass without consequence. But silence is not neutral. Silence is a choice. And that silence stung even more than his words. I felt myself sinking into a stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not the peaceful, comforting stillness of my nightly routines, but the cold, sharp stillness that comes right before a storm. Something inside me shifted. I had spent years accommodating them, helping them, offering what I could even when my own needs went unnoticed. They lived under my roof, ate food I paid for, enjoyed the comfort of a home I built with decades of hard work, and still somehow, he felt bold enough to treat me like an inconvenience. I didn't say anything. My voice stayed locked behind my teeth, held in place by the realization that arguing with him would achieve nothing. People like him don't learn through raised voices, they learn through consequences. Instead, I slowly stood up, keeping my dignity intact, and walked away. I didn't slam anything. I didn't make a dramatic exit. I simply removed myself from the space he had polluted with his disrespect. In my room, the air felt calmer, but my thoughts raced. How long had I allowed myself to be treated like a guest in my own house? How many small moments of disrespect had I brushed aside for the sake of peace? And when exactly had they started believing that they had the right to dictate my life? I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall but replaying the moment over and over, the remote being taken out of my hand, the dismissive tone, the phrase trash, the blank TV screen that had once been my comfort. I felt something tighten in my chest, not sadness, not anger, but resolve. I realized, perhaps for the first time in years, that I wasn't powerless. I wasn't dependent on them. And I certainly wasn't obligated to tolerate disrespect in my own home. That single moment, that simple act of turning off the TV, was the last thread snapping. They thought it was nothing. To them, it probably was. But to me, it was the moment that reminded me of my worth, my ownership, and my boundaries. He thought he could silence my show. He had no idea he was awakening my voice. And that voice would change everything that came next. When I walked away from the living room that day, I carried more than just hurt feelings. I carried a quiet decision forming inside me, like a seed taking root. I didn't need to raise my voice or confront anyone. I didn't need to defend myself to people who had already shown they didn't value my presence. The silence that followed wasn't weakness. It was strength gathering itself, preparing to stand up in a different, more powerful way. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else in the house. The sun had barely risen, and a soft golden light entered through the curtains. I sat on the edge of my bed for a moment, letting the stillness settle inside me. There was no anger left, only a clear understanding. If I didn't change the situation myself, no one else would. My silence wasn't an escape, it was the beginning of action. I stepped into the kitchen and made breakfast only for myself. Normally, I cooked for everyone, my daughter, her husband, whoever felt hungry. For years, I had done it without complaint, thinking it was expected of me as the elder, the mother, the provider. But that morning, as I fried a single egg and toasted a single piece of bread, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. I didn't need to justify it. I didn't need to explain it. For once, I served myself first. When my daughter walked in, she gave me a confused look. "Did you make anything for us?" I simply said, "No, not today," and continued eating. She didn't press the matter, but I could feel her surprise. She was used to me being available, present, and predictable. But the truth was, I had been too predictable, too accommodating, too willing to put myself second. After breakfast, I washed my plate, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. I didn't touch the dishes they left in the sink. I didn't tidy their mess, pick up their laundry, or prepare anything for lunch. What had once been my routine, my unspoken duty, no longer belonged to me. Throughout the day, I noticed small things I had ignored for too long. The way my son-in-law spoke loudly, expecting me to respond instantly. The way he left his shoes in the middle of the hallway, assuming someone, me, would move them. The way my daughter sighed whenever I asked for help, as if I were interrupting her life rather than contributing to it. These little moments, previously unnoticed or tolerated, now appeared clearly. They formed a pattern of disrespect I had accepted for far too long. But instead of confronting them, I simply pulled my energy away. I avoided unnecessary conversations. I stayed in my room when they watched TV. I went outside for walks without telling them when I would return. I called friends I hadn't spoken to in ages. I started reading again. enjoying the quiet company of books instead of the tension of the home I had created for them. The transformation was slow but steady. Every day that passed, I felt lighter. I didn't argue, I didn't explain. I just reclaimed myself in small, deliberate ways. My daughter eventually noticed. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked one afternoon. "I'm fine," I answered calmly. "But you're different." "I'm just taking care of myself," I replied. That was all I said, but she heard more than the words. She heard the shift. My son-in-law, however, remained oblivious. He continued acting as though nothing had changed, though he did seem confused when his clothes remained unwashed or when dinner wasn't magically ready when he walked through the door. He muttered under his breath sometimes, complaining, but I didn't react. Silence is a powerful teacher, if the student is paying attention. I finally took the biggest step a week later when I called a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't feel the need. This was my life, my decisions, my home, and I had the right to protect it. The conversation with the lawyer was simple, professional, and surprisingly empowering. He reminded me of something I had forgotten: everything belonged to me. The house, the finances, the decisions. I had allowed people to live in my space, but that didn't mean they owned it. That realization settled deep within me, steady and strong. When I eventually packed my bags, I did it quietly, without drama. I placed the house keys on the kitchen counter, not as a gesture of defeat, but as a reminder I was choosing myself at last. I walked out of that house with a calm heart, not looking back once. Funny how silence, when used wisely, becomes the loudest statement of all. It wasn't the shouting match they expected. It wasn't the emotional meltdown they might have imagined. It was simply me withdrawing the life, care, and energy I had given for years. They thought I would always be there, always available, always forgiving. But they were wrong. That silent strength, those small acts of reclaiming myself, set the stage for everything that happened later. And it all began the moment I decided to stop arguing and start choosing me. The decision to take control didn't come with anger or shouting, it came with clarity. A clarity so sharp it felt like a breath of cold air entering a room that had been suffocating for years. After days of withdrawing quietly, observing the way the house functioned without me holding everything together, I realized something that should have been obvious. I didn't owe anyone my peace, my energy, or my home. I had given so much for so long that they had begun to believe it was their right. That belief needed to end, so I made the call. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of place where serious decisions were made every day. The man across from me spoke calmly, walking me through every detail. He didn't need to convince me. I already knew what had to be done. I simply needed the legal structure to carry it through. As he explained the ownership documents, the rights I had, and the options available, I felt a quiet power settle into my bones. "This is your home," he said, sliding the file toward me. "You choose who lives in it." Simple words. But they sank deep. For years, I had allowed my daughter and her husband to live with me, because I believed I was doing what a mother should, supporting her child, offering stability, being the foundation for their new life. But over time, they had mistaken my generosity for obligation, my patience for weakness. My son-in-law walked around as if he were the head of the household, while my daughter followed his lead, forgetting who had opened the door to them in the first place. The lawyer handed me the papers I needed. I folded them carefully, placing them in my bag. When I stepped out of his office, the sunlight felt different, brighter, warmer, as if it approved of what I was about to do. Returning home, I felt no guilt, only purpose. I walked through every room, memorizing the things I had chosen, the memories I had made, the pieces of myself scattered everywhere. The house had been my pride, my comfort, my safe place long before anyone else set foot in it. But lately, it had felt like a burden, a responsibility trapped under disrespect and entitlement. I packed slowly, thoughtfully. A few clothes, my important documents, my jewelry, the framed photo of my parents, the book I was halfway through. I didn't need much, only the things that truly belonged to me, not the responsibilities others dumped onto my shoulders. I left behind furniture, dishes, decorations, things that were only physical, but I took my dignity with me. As I zipped my bag, I realized I hadn't felt this calm in years. My heartbeat was steady, my breathing even. There were no doubts, no fears, no second thoughts. Just a sense of quiet liberation, like stepping out of a cage I hadn't realized I was trapped in. I walked to the kitchen counter, placed the keys gently beside the fruit bowl, and looked around one last time. The house was silent. Too silent. Not with peace. but with the kind of silence that grows when resentment and entitlement fill the air. I didn't wait for them to come home. I didn't need a confrontation. They had treated me like I didn't matter. Now they could live with the consequences of that belief. Leaving the house felt like shedding a heavy coat I had been forced to wear through every season. I stepped outside into air that tasted fresher than any I had breathed in a long time. My taxi was already waiting at the curb. I climbed in without looking back. As the car pulled away, I saw the house shrinking in the rear view mirror. For a moment, I remembered all the years I had spent turning that building into a home. And then, I remembered the moment that made me walk away, the moment my son-in-law turned off the TV and dismissed something I loved with the words, trash. He didn't know it then, but he had pressed more than a button. He had pressed the limit of my patience. The further the taxi drove, the lighter I felt. My new apartment was small but warm, furnished just enough to be comfortable. No arguments. No footsteps storming through the hallway. No disrespect echoing through the rooms. Just peace. The first night I slept there, I didn't dream, I rested. Truly rested. For the first time in years, I felt like my life belonged to me again. Meanwhile, in the house I left behind, things were unraveling. Without me cooking, cleaning, organizing, and paying bills, reality began to sink in. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I had spent enough time carrying other people's responsibilities on my back. Taking control wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life, my time, my home. It was about reminding myself that I had value beyond what I provided for others. It was about drawing a line so clear that no one could pretend not to see it. I didn't leave out of anger, I left out of self-respect. And that decision, quiet, firm, and final, was the most powerful act I had made in years. 3 months passed before my phone finally rang with their number on the screen. 3 long months in which I rebuilt my piece by piece, and they unraveled thread by thread. When I picked up the call, my daughter's voice was small, trembling, nothing like the confident tone she carried when life was comfortable, and she believed she would never need me again. That alone told me everything before she even spoke. Life had finally taught the lesson my silence couldn't. "Mom, can we talk?" she whispered, as if her words might crack under their own weight. There was a time when that tone would have made me drop everything and rush to her. But that time had passed. I leaned back on my sofa, my new sofa in my peaceful apartment, and waited. "Of course," I said calmly. She hesitated. I could hear her breathing unevenly, almost shaky. "Well, we've been having a really hard time." A pause. Then a soft, broken confession. "Things got worse, much worse." I didn't respond. I let her continue because this was not my burden anymore. It was theirs. He lost his job, she admitted, and we fell behind on bills. We tried to manage everything, but it's too much. It struck me as darkly ironic. They had lived in my home for years without truly realizing that every bill, every rent payment, every bit of stability came from my efforts. My son-in-law had strutted around like a king in a kingdom he didn't build. Now, without my support, the ground under his feet had finally disappeared. "We were evicted," she finally said, voice breaking on the last word. Evicted. Thrown out of the home they once treated like their right. Reality had delivered the harsh truth that I never had to say out loud. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then the words came, thick with regret. "We're sorry. He's sorry. We were wrong." I heard the muffled sound of her crying, and for a second, my heart tightened, not out of weakness, but out of years of being her mother. But sympathy didn't wash away memory. It didn't erase the way I had been dismissed, belittled, treated like I didn't matter. "We shouldn't have treated you that way," she continued. "He shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I should have stood up for you. I see that now." Her regret was real, her voice shaking with honesty that came only after life cornered her. But it was the next sentence, the one she gathered courage to say, that revealed everything she truly wanted. "Mom, can we come back to live with you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and trembling. For a moment, I looked around my quiet apartment, my clean kitchen, my neatly arranged shelves, my TV playing the show I loved, the same show he once called trash. This home wasn't big, but it was peaceful. It was mine. Every inch of it held my quiet joy, my routines, my independence. There was no disrespect here, no slammed doors, no footsteps echoing entitlement, no tension in the air. Just serenity. Their return would shatter that peace instantly. So I asked her, gently but firmly, "Why would you want to come back with me?" Her breath hitched. She hadn't expected that. "Because we need you. We have nowhere else to go." Need. Not love, not respect, not family. Need. They remembered me when life pushed them to the edge. They remembered me when the comfort I once gave vanished. They remembered me only when circumstances forced them to see my worth. I understand, I said softly. But I need to be honest with you. Silence stretched. She braced herself. The way you treated me, the way he spoke to me, I can't forget that. I forgave you, but forgetting is different, and I won't allow myself to return to a place where my presence is tolerated only when convenient. She began crying again. Mom, please, we'll change. We'll respect you. We'll do anything. Just please help us. Her desperation was real. Her tears were real. But I had spent years giving chances to people who mistook my kindness for weakness. You can visit me, I said gently. I will always love you. But live with me. No. That chapter is closed. Her sobs filled the line, but I stayed calm. Calm like someone who finally understood her own worth. Calm like someone who had walked out once and refused to walk back into the fire. I hope you understand, I added. This is not punishment. This is protection of my peace, my dignity, my home. She cried softly, apologizing again and again, but deep down I knew she finally understood the cost of her silence and his disrespect. When life took away the comfort I had provided, they learned the value of what they had thrown away so casually. After the call ended, I placed my phone on the table and took a deep breath. I turned my TV back on. My show lit up the screen, filling the room with familiar voices and warmth. The same show he had once shut off, the same show he called trash. Now, no one could touch my remote. No one could silence my joy. No one could shrink my worth. I leaned back, took a sip of tea, and smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of strength. Some lessons in life must be learned the hard way, and they had finally learned theirs. When the phone call ended and the apartment grew quiet again, I sat there for a long moment, letting the weight of what I had just done settle inside me. It wasn't a comfortable weight, not exactly. It wasn't joy either. It was something deeper, something like closure. For years I had given so much of myself to people who believed I would always bend, always forgive, always be waiting in the same place no matter how they behaved. But now, for the first time, I had drawn a boundary so clear that even the softest person could not be pushed past it. I didn't deny my daughter because I stopped loving her. Love had never been the question. I denied her because she needed to understand that love does not mean sacrificing your dignity. Love does not mean absorbing disrespect until you disappear. Love, real love, requires respect, and that was the one thing they took from me without hesitation. And now, finally, I took it back. After the call, I didn't rush to distract myself or push the emotions away. Instead, I stood up slowly and walked into my kitchen. The small space felt warmer than usual. My kettle sat on the counter, the same one I bought after moving out, reminding me of the independence I regained. I filled it with water and set it to boil. As the steam curled upward, I thought about all the quiet moments I had missed in the chaos of that house, the chance to make myself a cup of tea without rushing, the freedom to sit at a table without stepping around someone's mess, the stillness that allowed me to breathe deeply. I carried my cup to the balcony. The evening breeze brushed gently against my face. Below me, the city moved on with its usual rhythm, unaware of the small victory unfolding in a modest apartment several floors up. As I sipped my tea, I realized something important. Boundaries aren't built from anger. They're built from self-respect. My decision wasn't revenge. It was finally protecting myself. The past 3 months had taught me that peace is not something that happens by accident. It must be created, maintained, defended. If I had let them move in again, everything I had rebuilt would crumble. The entitlement would seep back in. The disrespect would quietly return. The unspoken expectation that I exist to serve them would settle back into the walls like mold. My peaceful routines, my morning tea, my quiet reading hours, my evening show, would once again be interrupted by people who never recognized their value. I thought back to the moment that started this entire journey. That single gesture, him grabbing the remote, turning off the TV, and dismissing something I loved with, enough of this trash, had been small but revealing. He hadn't just turned off a show, he had turned off my comfort, my right to enjoy something simple in my own home. He had made a decision for me without me. And my daughter in her silence had allowed it. Now, 3 months later, their world had collapsed. The cushion of my support was gone, and they finally saw what it felt like to stand on their own feet without someone holding them steady. Life had humbled them in ways I never could have. And when they reached out, asking to return, I realized their desperation came from necessity, not understanding. If I let them move in again, They would feel relief, but not transformation. The respect would last only as long as my help did. So I protected myself, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. As I sat there on the balcony, I felt no bitterness. I actually hoped they would find a way to rebuild their lives. I hoped my daughter would learn to speak up, to never again let someone mistreat the person who raised her. I hoped my son-in-law would finally understand humility, respect, and gratitude. People grow when life demands it. Maybe this was their moment to grow. I finished my tea and returned inside. My apartment was small, but every inch of it held my peace. My books on the shelf were exactly where I left them. My blankets were neatly folded, my dishes clean, my TV remote resting quietly on the side table, untouched by anyone but me. When I turned on the TV and my show began, I felt a warm sense of ownership. Not of the remote, but of my life. I leaned back on the soft couch, letting the familiar characters fill the room with comfort. No one barged in. No one snatched the remote. No one rolled their eyes. No one told me what I could or couldn't enjoy. This moment, this exact moment, was proof that walking away had been the right choice. Sometimes, reclaiming your life means leaving behind people you love. Sometimes, the only way to teach a lesson is by stepping out of the place where disrespect can reach you. As the episode ended and the room grew quiet again, I felt something inside me settle into place. A truth I had known all my life but never lived for myself. Peace is not a gift someone gives you, it is something you protect. And now, finally, I was protecting mine.